Good evening and welcome to the inaugural West Coast Now Live Humans of the Coast. My name is Dan Mesec. I am a producer with West Coast Now, which is a regional media initiative that is focused on uplifting, exploring, and understanding the people, the natural environment, and the economy of BC's West Coast. With me tonight is my co-host, Emmelin Leclerc. Emmelin, how you doing?
Thank you, Dan, for that introduction. I'm so excited to be here. And the reason for that is because tonight we have a very special guest for our West Coast Now live show, Jackie Hildering, also known as the Marine Detective. She is a biology teacher, cold water diver, underwater photographer, and humpback whale researcher living in the territories of the Kwakwala-speaking Peoples, Northeast Vancouver Island. Welcome to our show, Jackie.
Thank you so much. Thrilled to be here.
Great. And both having you here is such an honor for me as well. Finally, we get to dig back into some of this business. As we move forward, just a couple of housekeeping issues for those of you who've joined us on the live stream on Facebook. We invite you to put any questions or comments that you have into the chat box on the live stream on Facebook. The Marine Detective, Jackie, will be asked some of these questions when we get a moment. We have a number of them. And so if you have any, please pop them in there and we'll get to them as best we can. Also, as I mentioned, a couple of housekeeping things. We're going to run this for a little while. We're trying to keep it under an hour. So if you have any friends, pop them a message right now and get them on the live stream to have them ask a live question of Jackie Hildering and hear our chat about the wonder and awe of the West Coast of BC. As well, just a note, we encourage you to ask any kinds of questions about the coast, but we ask them to be respectful and we do not tolerate any abuse or derogatory language. So please keep that in mind as we move forward. From there, I'll kick it over to Emmelin to get us started.
All right, well, to start off, I understand, Dan, that you have a very basic first question for Jackie.
I do. I know that some people who are on the stream probably have heard of Jackie's work before as the Marine Detective, but what does a Marine Detective do, Jackie? Who are you and where do you live?
What you're asking is what the heck is a Marine Detective? Yeah.
Indeed.
So the origin behind all of that is that I am an escaped biology teacher from the Netherlands. I grew up on the coast of British Columbia, but taught and was perceived to have an important career as the deputy head of the International School of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And after going on one whale watching trip on northern Vancouver Island, it was very, very clear to me that I drifted off course, that I wasn't learning from nature. I was talking about it as if it were somewhere else. So I jumped, I left the career. I moved to northern Vancouver Island, and since then, I've been learning from one small part of the planet, from individual fish to individual whales. And at some point, when I was a head naturalist for a whale watching company, very ethical whale watching company, I was working for Fisheries and Oceans Canada. Humpback research had begun. I was working for the Numgis First Nation on open net pen salmon farming. It's like, what the heck am I doing? And a dear friend said, you're a Marine Detective. And it is, what I hope that suggests is that for me, it's about mystery. It's certainly about empowerment, and it's massively about humility. If there's something that we don't know about, it is the ocean in its entirety, and that there is so much to be revealed about its importance and the life within it, certainly in cold, dark water.
So about the mystery about the water, is there anything that living here on the West Coast you didn't expect to find?
Yeah, I think I was like many people, that I grew up on the coast and was also locked into what I reference as ocean blindness, that I had an understanding of what was at the surface, but not what was below the surface. So when I began scuba diving, my mind was blown by the color. And I should have known, like, I'm a biologist. You can't have giant animals at the surface of the water that are here to feed. Yeah, in fact, that leatherback turtles come from all the way from Indonesia to feed in these waters, endangered leatherback turtles. I too, even as a biologist who was educated here, had fallen into the bias of there's more in warm water, which of course is impossible. If you've got clear water, you don't have the plankton to support the abundance of life. What really surprises me though, and it was always a theme for me in teaching, is the aspect of humility and realizing that human ingenuity isn't the answer to everything but was actually just how little was known. So when I was new to things and it was like, hey, what's this animal? And I would be lucky enough to tap into expertise. It's like, we don't know. Yeah, or who laid these eggs? We don't know. How do humpbacks find their food? Nobody knows. So it is the intensity of how little is known that is the biggest surprise to me.
Jackie, I know, most Canadians across the country, but especially here in BC, have this very deep love and appreciation of the value that the coast has. But many people look out over the ocean and they see this kind of vast darkness, this vast dark landscape, and a lot of them probably think there's nothing really going on. They see maybe whales breach every now and then, some things on the surface, but under the surface it's teeming with life. Tell me about that. What have you explored, and why do you do this work?
Yeah, I do this work because it's desperately important to the welfare of future generations, and I'm a teacher through and through. And as I share my screen here, like I can speak, but I would rather like show to give a sense of just of the diversity. So it's, I think, really surprising to people, the color. Here's a good example, like on cue, but also the density. Like when the few times that I have dived in warm water, I am surprised like that not every rock is covered. So I think indeed, and I often start presentations this way. I ask people who love the coast, close your eyes and imagine what it looks like below the surface. And you very quickly, I think, see that people are having a moment like I had and realizing like, oh my God, I've been locked at the surface. I haven't considered, how much life there has to be in order to have the giants of the planet feeding here. And this really reveals itself to me, this bias, and that we get fed so much imagery of warm water. And I can talk about why that is. I think people probably have a good understanding, but it really revealed itself to me when I became a whale researcher, and specifically for humpback whales, because so often I get asked, why are the whales here? And what that reveals is that there's the presumption that they belong in Hawaii, Mexico, Central America, the breeding areas where the females, if they're nursing, will lose up to half their body mass because there isn't the food for them. And yet that's where we think they belong. We should be asking why they would ever leave here. This is the dark. This is the plankton-rich water. This has more oxygen in it. These are areas of incredible currents that end up distributing the nutrients. So that really does reveal that even those of us who love the coast, who intuitively, or even with the limited amounts that we see in intertidal zones and at the surface, that there's a lot of work to be done, considering we're the keepers of paradise that are impacting the decisions around this coast, to understand what sustains the giants. And of course, at the core of all of this too is why focus on the ocean is the ocean is the life-sustaining force on the planet. And yet there's this misconception there too, that there's a divide between land and sea, and there isn't. It's the same water going around like since before life on Earth. And that water is usually in saline state, most of it. You have 50% of the Earth's oxygen being produced, no matter where you're on the planet. You're reliant on the ocean for the algae that are producing the oxygen. Carbon dioxide is being buffered. There's food, and then there's all kinds of things like the inspiration, healing, and so forth.
So on your page as well, you speak of the great beauty, mystery, and fragility hidden beneath the wave, which you've slightly touched on, but can you give us an example of something that maybe you haven't answered or that you're still trying to answer?
There's so much. Like, as an example, right in front of Port McNeill, in 1 meter of water, there is this oval anchored stalk jelly. It's only about this big. And it's easy to find. And same sort of thing again, like, hey, yeah, there's a super cool jelly. And if you look at it, you can deduce what its adaptations are. It's got a stalk, it attaches to things like eelgrass and sort of seaweed. And then it's got those pom-pom like bits. And a lot of animals in our water, the invertebrates, the animals without backbones, have a lot of surface area because they're feeding on the plankton. So using those pom-poms, get a lot of plankton and in the mouth. This is an unnamed species. I didn't discover it, but when I fed it into expertise greater than my own, it's like, oh, wow, cool that they're there. Nobody's yet written the paper about this, which is definitely a new species. And then there are the realization that, you know, we're so lucky to have a second chance post whaling with giant whales like fin whales and humpback whales. And in all the questions, to realize that, yeah, that nobody even knows how humpback whales find their food. They don't have biosonar in the same way as toothed whales, like an orca that can pick out a sockeye salmon over a Chinook salmon. They simply haven't evolved that way. And then you layer on things like once you decide to learn from nature, you really don't know what's going to happen. So one of the biggest things, like the biggest surprises in my life was trying to catch up. Like we just wanted to know. So I've got two hats here. I'm the marine detective, but I'm also a humpback researcher, co-founder, education lead for the Marine Education and Research Society based in Port McNeill. So we just wanted to know who the humpbacks were, trying to make it count. And of course, with the overlap with fishing activity and boats, it's become trying to close the gap with regards to whale safety and with boaters' safety. And IDing who they are, which we do by their tails and the fins on their backs, but now we ID them by the markings in their mouths, because some of the whales have learned a completely new feeding strategy that has never been documented again in any humpbacks on Earth before. So again, like focusing on a small part of the planet and getting a sense of just the intricacies of how things fit together. But then once you get the joy of knowing or being able to recognize individuals, so what's happening here is typically what humpbacks and other baleen whales will do is they will rush through the food to get a giant mouthful. Very often birds are an indicator of that, and birds are also diving down to try to ball the fish up. But in the case of trap feeding, and you're looking right into the palate of the humpback here, what's happening is there isn't enough feed to justify the energy it would take to rush through it. So better just to hang at the surface, set a trap. If there's still birds chasing after the fish, they'll hide in your mouth. So I hope that gives a sense, like from the little oval anchored stalk jelly up to humpbacks, but also like huge mysteries. One of the, like, and this is a sad one, is one of the biggest die-offs, wildlife die-offs in known history is happening to sea stars. And it's been happening since 2013 from the border of Mexico up into Alaska. It impacted 20 species of sea star. And the one that certainly hasn't bounced back is the sunflower star, the giants that we should be seeing on every piling. And the average person doesn't know because it's happening in the dark. And what's happening here is that they contort, so they shouldn't look like this, all contorted. It is a normal response. So here's a video that's been sped up, a video from the Vancouver Aquarium, where they're shedding their arms, and typically they'd be able to regenerate for as long as a part of the central disc was still there, but they never get the chance. They turn into these massive piles of decay, and nobody knows why. It was first thought to be a virus, then a bacteria. It does seem related to a change in climate, no surprise. It's very likely that ocean species are going to testify to environmental problems first, considering the runoff that's coming from land, but also the impacts from warmth. And then it really matters. It matters not just for sunflower stars, but sunflower stars eat these guys, green urchins, and their job is to graze on kelp. And then if they do that, so this is sped up as well, then instead of having the kelp forests that are producing oxygen, that are incredibly important habitat, that buffer carbon dioxide, that are food, then what you end up getting is urchin barrens. So there is that incredible, like this is an example again of that ocean blindness, because if this were happening at the surface, like for example, if sea otters, were showing up dead all over the place, sea otters have a similar role in the environment, there'd be incredible concern. There would be funding for research. There would be urgency around giving them protection, but it happens below the surface.
I guess a follow-up to that, Jackie, what research, what work are you doing to try to identify, some of the implications and consequences of this?
Yeah, so the only research that I really do, where I would call myself a scientist, is around humpbacks. Yeah, I know humpbacks. I do research on everything from how many of them have entanglement scarring onward and who they are. The rest of this is all like citizen science. For example, in the case of sunflower stars, by documenting sites to count how many sunflower stars there are and what state they're in. So a whole lot of what I do, this as the marine detective, it is much more about education and working towards using the imagery that I never thought I would be taking pictures underwater, but in having found how powerful that is to literally be able to speak for the life that sustains the likes of humpback whales, that then what I'm hoping for is that there's a cascade that goes from, I didn't know that was here. It's the color, the density, the species, and that leads to connection, to wonder, and ultimately to action. And not to burden people with that, but there are common solutions to an awful lot of problems. So to help show the happiness associated with living in connection with nature, to learn from nature, to be in service to future generations, is very much what I'm about. And this is probably the most powerful image in that regard that I ever took, where I started realizing just how far the photography could go, because this is at a boat ramp in Port Hardy, northern Vancouver Island. You can see the sun. So it's only at about 3 meters depth. And then what this generates from people at some level of just because of the wonder of this species, that people ask, that's here. It's like, yeah, that's here.
Sometimes looking at what's underwater and the complications and the problems that are going on, do you ever feel like discouraged? And if you do, like, what do you just tell yourself to keep yourself going, to keep you motivated?
Yeah, thank you. And it means a lot to be asked that question. So what I have chosen for is a life where I am documenting individual sunflower stars from week to week dying. What I have chosen for is to stand beside a dead humpback that I saw when she was alive. So the impacts of that, when it's not just at an ecosystem level, and what so many of us feel a sense of overwhelm and worry, this is at the level of knowing individuals who are impacted. But what keeps me going is if I don't feel like I can be part of the solution, like I simply don't understand where it then is to check out. Because if I check out, if I disappear into the pit of despair, the very system and the powers that I wish to work against to show the happiness that comes from living a more simple life, to understand that we're being manipulated by fear and overwhelm so that things can continue in the same direction and not serve future generations. So part of that is what keeps me going. It's just simply not acceptable to succumb to overwhelm. I understand where it's coming from. And then also I know what the healing part of that is. And the healing is to feel this connection, to feel this drive, to know, like, thank God I still get to be involved with kids. It's got to be that I don't check out. And it really helps as well that I so absolutely believe there's not a whole bunch of disparate problems. They get presented that way even by environmental groups like Save the Bees, Save the Trees, Save this is your last chance, like all of this, because there is urgency. But it is also that I live very strictly by, I don't have to be perfect, but I do know the things that help. And I very much believe that the key thing is that living a life of less is about gains. Yeah, so modeling that to people, showing how it's possible, showing the opportunities that come from looking at life differently and seeing what opportunities might lie ahead, all of that really helps.
Jackie, I guess just a quick note. If you have other images to share, by all means. If not, we can switch back to just the picture. I guess one question I have, since we were looking at some of the images, is, you've spent a lot of time underwater. These images are stunning. What is the most unique experience that you've had photographing some of this underwater?
Oh gosh. Oh, okay. Suddenly turning around and that my dive buddy has an octopus hugging her. So really, really important is like it's a strict like no take, no touch, like try to be as benign as possible. Don't have crappy buoyancy so you're kicking things, all of that. But in this case, what had happened, like there is no like pouncing of octopuses. They just don't do that. If that happens, they've been provoked. But in this case, it was an exchange where, and I've had this happen too, where we're kind of looking at one another and you're dealing with such an intelligent entity, and the octopus touched a part of her gear that was made of metal and was clearly like flashing color, like when does an octopus feel metal? And then being the incredibly good diver she was, again, nothing was provoked. She made sure that she had a regulator in her mouth. And I watched as the octopus explored her and then backed off. And that was certainly like absolutely a mind-blowing experience. But there's also times like, hey, like, let's see what it looks like underwater here. There's a lot of currents, maybe there's a lot of life. And then the species behind me, this isn't accidental, is that there's this one spot then that I know of close to where my home is, where this is a basket star. This is a kind of sea star that crawls around, forms a basket with this incredible intricacy to capture plankton, and they'll actually like crawl up on the kelp to get better vantage point. They unfurl, they go back, and to come down in this spot. And what I now reference as the Valley of the Basket Stars, because here are all these like surreal, like right under the surface, these incredibly surreal animals, like at least 100 of them living out their lives where the average person doesn't know that they exist.
Yeah. I guess that kind of brings me to the other question. In other work that we've done, we try to connect people to the land, to the ocean. We talk to people who are connected. We all have a connection to the ocean and to land in some form. You mentioned your kind of initial experience with the whale watching, and that kind of changed things for you. But tell me a little bit about your home, because it is a particularly active place with a lot of these creatures underwater. And so tell me a little bit about Port McNeill. Kind of what do you see day to day? What do you hear from others along that area? And on the same note, where else have you explored on BC's coast?
Yeah, so I am a Northern Vancouver Islander, a territory of the Kwakwala-speaking people, Alert Bay, Sointula, Port Alice, Port Hardy, Port McNeill, Telegraph Cove. And there is an incredible confluence of currents here. The accident of glaciation, that you've got the ocean bottom being what it is, the islands being where they are, you get these collisions of tides, upwellings, downwellings. So indeed, there are these extraordinary places on the coast, many of them not protected by a large population base. Like there is that swinging of things, right? That if there's a area near, say, Vancouver, it's like, we must protect this. Yeah, maybe, but how about these other spots where there's less people to protect them? At any rate, it's a resource user community. There is an incredible wealth of First Nations history, of course, because these areas have sustained humans for a very, very long time. And it is an area that is reconciling its and this is a very sweeping statement because it differs per community, but it is a logging community. It was a mining community as well. It was a fishing community, but we British Columbians were gold rushers, other than the First Nations. So it is shifting where it used to be very much about, say, logging versus sustainability, where it's much more about wanting to log for longer. Yeah, so that is what my neighbors very much are about. So and moving in the direction much more of sustainability as well as resource use.
On your within your photos, you post a lot of pictures of kelp forests. So why should someone care about kelp forests? Aren't they just a type of algae? Isn't algae bad? Like,
brilliant, Emmelin. So you've been in a kelp forest because you're a diver too, right? It is and this is something like my whole bottom left leg is a bull kelp tattoo from one of my photos. I had never expected like the same thing with like this journey that I'm on, and like coming in really naive and discovering things myself and assuming that others knew things. But when I had a couple of kelp forest photos, I could not believe the reaction they got from people. So there is something like just intrinsically beautiful about kelp, but also, yeah, it is a forest. So I think in that like realization of like, holy crap, I never thought about this. There's forests underwater, and I get to see the top, I get to see the canopy, but I hadn't considered. So I do think it is where we get a chance to, I think an awful lot of humans actually want to be in a state of humility and wonder. And I think those two things are really closely connected. So that when there's that, like I saw that stuff at the beach, I never realized, yeah, that's what it looked like, or how quickly it grew, or whatever else. And then you have just the intrinsic beauty of it. And then it is pretty easy to go like, it's a forest. It's a forest. The ocean is creating oxygen. The ocean is buffering carbon dioxide. This is habitat. This is food. And it's not just these giant kelps that you're seeing, but the thickness in the ocean includes an awful lot of microscopic algae that are doing all this work as well. Yeah, so it's such an incredible way to connect. And of like all places on earth that I would consider my cathedral, my church, the place that connects me the most, it is in that place just under the canopy of a kelp forest where the sun is streaming down. Yeah, there's an awful lot of humility. And also I think like generally it's not just a big piece of this, especially for me, having come from the Netherlands, small country, high population density, so grateful for having been there and what I learned. But you, in urban settings, you can get the sense that you're in control. And what I love most about choosing for this life of being out on my boat and learning from nature or throwing myself below the waves is it's pretty hard to feel like you're in control. And that sort of humility again, but also realizing the connection to nature is something that I can't escape. And it's something I absolutely was starved for when I came back from the Netherlands.
That's so cool. I also hear though that other than kelp forests, you have a passion for nudibranchs. So what is a nudibranch?
And the crowd goes wild. Yeah. If there's marine detective followers on here, I see you people. I know that you get upset when I don't show enough nudibranch pictures. So yeah, nudibranch or nudibranch, whichever one prefers, but not nudibranch. Yeah, and what they are, and this is me going to share my screen again. So I think for many people, they're kind of like a gateway mollusk. And what I mean by that, sorry, I'm having a hard time sharing my screen, stand by. So yeah, so they are one of the most powerful ambassadors for the color and diversity, because when people see species like this, they presume that they are looking at tropical species, and they're not. And then when people get a little bit of knowledge about nudibranchs, I think it almost forms this kind of like, I know something other people don't, which is great, right? Because I know what a nudibranch is, and that they end up being the gateway for people to learn more about the environment. Yeah, but what they are is they are a subgrouping of sea slug. So I'll often get people correcting me and saying, you don't mean sea slug, you mean nudibranchs. Like, no, actually, I mean nudibranch, because not all sea slugs are nudibranchs. The nudibranchs are the ones that have naked gills. Yeah, and there's incredible diversity in them, but they are also so wickedly freaking cool. Like, this is one of the like mysteries that I started off with, because they have, every species has different looking egg masses. So something like this is 30 centimeters across. Every dot has multiple eggs in it. So that also allows people to like, oh my God, yeah, like if survival in the ocean, yeah, is going to have to take an awful lot of eggs, fertilized eggs, but also that they hatch out into the ocean and the survival chances of that, but also just like the intrinsic beauty and wonder. And then, yeah, so with all these years now of diving, one of my favorite things is to match which sea slug, which laid which eggs. So yeah, nudibranchs are wicked, wicked cool.
Is there a reason for the different patterns of their egg formations, or just?
I think it's just evolutionary, but I don't know. And I also love saying that I don't know. But some of them are more similar if they're more closely related nudibranch species. So it is a little bit in that realm, but indeed they are reflective, like how similar they are reflective of how divergent they are in terms of evolution. But for why it's got this general design versus this design, no, not known.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and it's so unfortunate because like all these kind of questions that are about curiosity and connection, so much of it doesn't get funded anymore, nor is there opportunity, like even in a university setting, because generally being a naturalist, like that used to mean something. And not that I'm advocating like the drawers of specimens and the jars of things, but you could be a generalist in your learning about nature. And that allows things to be way more place-based as well. So I consider that I have this like extraordinary privilege because everything that guides me is based on place rather than species. But it is now so hard, like, you know, why has nobody written a paper about that little oval stalk jelly? It's because there's no economic value associated with it, and that is what drives us. And as a result, you don't even know how many there are. You don't get baseline data. And this is actually true even of mammals. Everybody, by tomorrow, you have a chance to weigh in on fin whales off our coast getting their protection reduced when we don't even know how many there are.
That's
that's I was gonna say that's it's concerning to hear that. I'm sure a lot of people who live on the coast probably feel the same way. A lot of the work that you do in your education is about conservation work, really. I mean, trying to educate people about why they should care and what is actually there that we don't see. Tell me a little bit about that education work. What do you do when you are teaching? What do you try to communicate about what you're experiencing and what you're researching underwater?
Yeah, a big chunk of my life has gone in the direction of needing to talk about humpback whales, because there are such concerns that the large whales could get their protection reduced based on presumptions of number or population structure, when the threats are so clearly increasing. You can't argue that they're not increasing when you have way more large whales overlapping with fishing gear and noise and the actual risk of collision. So, but even in those presentations, I will sneak in a slideshow. I will like, this is the world in which the whales live. The other parts of my life where I have kids' books that are like, where's Waldo? But you're looking for fish. They're Find the Fish books. I put calendars into the world. A lot of it is based on the imagery. And when I can, I do these sorts of presentations as well, and have strived for things like a children's TV show and whatnot. But what I want more and more, and certainly with the local kids, so this is where I try to drop everything, is to show them that I can point like, this fish lives there, and that and that there is that connection. And I am positioned really uniquely to do that, where they're not learning. Like so often I hear, yeah, I did a school report, or my child did a school report, and they did it about green turtles. I was like, yay, question mark, like why green turtles? Like, could they not have done it on one of the species that is literally at our doorstep? So I want to swing much more in that direction, and certainly like as locally as possible.
Mhm. And it kind of, brings up a point, of current events that are going on right now. As you mentioned, the ocean is not just full of whales and fish. There's a lot of other life under there. And as you mentioned, some things that we don't even know what's there. We don't even know what we're losing in some cases.
Oh.
And this past fall, there's been consultations and meetings going on talking about marine protected areas, kind of like, parks on the ocean that would designate certain areas that are sensitive. What do you think that looks like? What would you want to see out of that? Because we do have all these areas where we don't even know what is under there. We don't even know what we're losing when it is gone.
Yeah, so incredible hope is associated with marine protection areas if they are science-based. And that is both traditional knowledge as well as science, and that it isn't that if we don't know enough, we're not going to protect this area, right? That it's the reverse of precaution. Marine protection areas, like no two will be the same, very likely. So I think that's something that many people think like, oh my God, it's going to be like a no-go zone or a no fishing zone or a no whatever zone. No, it depends on the value attributed to that part of the ocean. And if it is science-based, what it allows for is removing like that bias of urbanization, for example. So there's incredibly important areas in Howe Sound, for example, near Vancouver. But what about the remote areas? Yeah, what about the areas where nobody is even like looking out at them? What about the 350 kilometers of ocean that extends beyond Haida Gwaii and Vancouver Island, where I've got the privilege of doing surveys out there too? And what is so promising about them, if they are science-based, if they are fact-based, is that they allow for a holistic approach, where now for the protection of species under Canada's Species and Risk Act, what you get is an understandably like labored process to decide what level of risk a species is, but then the funding and attention and research go into the species only. So for example, endangered southern resident killer whales, like hell yes, they need protection and their habitat needs protection. But what if we coupled that with the glass sponge reefs where they are? What about the humpback whales where they are? What about the fin whales? What about the abalone? And that is what marine protected areas would do, where instead of having it species-based, you have it looking at the value based on hopefully productivity, like in terms of nutrition, oxygen production, carbon dioxide buffering, but also the interconnection of species, because of course these species do not exist in isolation.
Yeah, we often hear, this buzzword biodiversity, but it's always focused on, land or forest. But there's, what would be the equivalent underwater? Because it seems to me, like you mentioned, kelp forests producing oxygen, like there's so many intricacies and complexities in there. What does that look like? And how do you make sense of that?
I make sense of it from a place of, holy crap, we've got to be careful about our decision making, because like those 100 basket scars that I talk about are in that one spot. And like another example of this, as I again attempt to share here, is like there's this like extraordinarily beautiful species. This is a kind of barnacle, unlike any barnacle you've ever seen. So this barnacle, there's only one main place that they grow in abundance because they need so much oxygen. So you have to, it's so north of Port Hardy, territory, the Kwakwala-speaking near Turret Rock, Naquacto Rapids. And these gooseneck barnacles, when they are not at the surface, they look like this, like with the red that is actually hemoglobin, because they're loading up with that much oxygen. So this species is only in that one spot, like with few other patches on other parts of our coast. So are they economically valuable? No. Yeah, are they an absolute marvel of adaptation and that we don't know enough about its ecological role and what it needs and all of that? Hell yeah. So there is that importance, and sorry, and then making clear as well. So this is what they look like when they're near the surface. And these are not the ones people might be going, oh yeah, I know these. You probably don't, like, because if it's not in that area, there are other gooseneck barnacle species like on the outside of Vancouver Island that look similar, but this is this incredibly colorful species. But when there has to be black pigment blocking out the sunlight because they can't tolerate the sunlight. So sorry, like a lot of like an avalanche of words here, but it is so incredibly important. I think like if British Columbians, but Canadians more broadly, because the ocean is wherever you are on Earth, let alone in Canada, right? It's on your mountains, it's coming out of your tap. Whatever it is, you're benefiting from the ocean, you're impacting the ocean. But even just understanding, like having the appropriate, like this absence of bias to think like, oh yeah, whatever, like there's just a lot of dark here. It's better in Hawaii. I can see the fishes in Hawaii. It's like, hell no, right? Understand how little we know. Understand that British Columbia is likely like one of the only places on Earth, together with Alaska, where sunflower stars have a chance of survival right now, right? So there's not just a national interest in keeping them alive and their importance in the ecosystem. There's actually like an international importance to it.
Speaking of Canadians, British Columbians wanting to get involved, I have a question from one of our viewers, Jackie Helena, and she is also a diver, and her question is, how can she physically be involved in helping with research other than giving money?
Yeah, such a good question. So if you're a diver, tag you're it, speak for what you see. I'm not saying that everybody has to turn into a photographer, but you are one of the people under the waves. And I'm not about there being more people in the ocean, by the way. Like, I'm not promoting everyone should go diving. No, not. Yeah, you got to be pretty dedicated to be a cold water diver. There's a lot of expense involved, but also a lot of danger, and you have to have a very good reason to be down there. But Jackie, speak for the ocean. And then I know you want something more concrete. And there is everything from like volunteering at aquariums, being able to speak from like a non-theoretical place, from a very emotional place. But there is also, there will be the need to do more monitoring. So there's things like bio blitzes. There is the reef program has fish surveys where you're helping with collecting baseline data in that regard. iNaturalist is brilliant for anybody. You don't have to be a diver, where you're helping, like it is what is it, non-academic science at its best, where people are inputting what they see in the area the areas that they know well, which will become so important, because you hear anecdotally people saying, like, I don't see the kelp isn't the same that it used to be in front of my house or where I've gone fishing or whatever else, but we don't have the data for that. So doing all kinds of, and please feel free to reach out to me. So there is everything from contributing to bio blitzes, which is like these short periods of time to get get baseline data for certain areas of the coast, contributing to iNaturalist, speaking from our platforms for the life that we see. Even you don't have to have a camera, but being able to speak for, what fuels you emotionally in a way that other people may not have that. I'm
just going to jump in the interest of time. We're just at about 45 here. And I want to kick it over to Emmelin for one last question for her, but then I have something else to ask you as well.
Yeah, thank you. So for a last question, as the Marine detective, what are life lessons you would like to communicate to the younger generation?
It means so much to be asked by you, right? Like for starters, we don't know the reality of the generations below us, right? Like I think it's so important for people of my demographic to reflect on that. Like this downward pressure that we often put on younger people when it comes to you're our hope. Like it maddens me when people say that. Like I understand what they're saying, but no, we're the younger generation's hope. We don't get to like step out and go, it's too late. I enjoyed all the abundance. I had mad consumer behavior. No, yeah, it is. The lessons are truly, I think, like one of the most important things is to realize the forces that are trying to drive you in a direction you may not agree with. And I think younger generations are way better at this, but to realize that there are like these societal narcotics being pushed at us, that success equals house, success equals job of a certain nature, success equals whatever. And I love seeing like, no, how about this tiny house? And then what I get to do is have more time, which is more valuable than anything else, because then I get to do what I want. So to be aware of like the petri dish that you're in, where you're going to get these values pushed down on you in a world that's changing so rapidly. And that with that rapid change, it means that the value systems can't, like the generations before you are likely not going to be a match. But not only that, to perceive that as opportunity, because there are so many examples of like, okay, things are shifting in this direction. People, excuse me, are getting their heads out of their asses and understand what the hell were we doing with plastic straws? Like, okay, let's start there. But then to realize the opportunities where there are jobs that haven't even been created yet, and that you can actually get ahead of things by, again, understanding the system. Here we are talking about the environment, like understand the ecosystem that you're in. And so it's understanding that there is going to be fear pushed at you, and that despondency is a real risk, and that the solutions to that are to perceive common solutions to social environmental problems. So things like realizing, and we haven't even talked about this, like it's so easy to get stuck in the sludge of like, humans are terrible, they're destroying the earth. Wait a minute, we used to overtly shoot at orca. Yeah, and like the nose of a seal was worth $5 up to 1964. We butchered whales up to 55 years ago. We've got an astounding capacity for change when we have knowledge replacing fear, and when we understand that we're being manipulated in a direction by values that are likely not our own, and that so few of us get a chance to lift our heads up and go, wait a minute, I did the things, I did the school, I did some more school, I got the job, I have a house, there's a baby. Uh-oh, wait a minute, what? So to have that perspective on what is shaping my value systems is like an incredible place to start. And then to know what your values are, if you can somehow remove yourself from all the advertising and all the noise and everything from generations before you, and then to reflect on, okay, and then what am I going to do? But not to operate from a place of sadness, right? Like very often with younger, no, not just younger, very often environmentalists who have a lot of identity at stake are about righteousness, and that they need to push against something else in order to be the one who is the better, rather than bringing people closer and closing the divide. So to know as well that it is about closing the divide, and that it is essential not to have like this martyrdom and righteousness in the world, but rather look at my life of a small footprint, doing the things that I love. Look at the happiness associated with this.
Mm-hmm. No
I
doubt.
must say, I feel so inspired after that, and I'm sure a lot of other people will too.
And I will add too, Emmelin, because it is such an important point. We older folks also do this super shitty thing where we say like, oh, the youth, they just care about their technology. They're like, for crap's sake, how do you think this is going to move forward without the technology? If the values are there, driven by understanding our place in the environment and a love for it, and value systems that are pure and more personalized, those values coupled with technology makes boom boxes go from this to this. It drives things that are local. It shapes political powers and the amount of subsidies and opportunities, research opportunities, everything that there are for alternative technologies. Like the people of my age, those politicians are looking down going, holy crap, we won't be able to control those people. Their values are completely different.
Yeah, no, this has been really great, Jackie and Emmelin, and I hope our viewers feel the same way. We're going to continue these conversations. So if folks haven't been able to jump on live, this will be available later to view. But we're also going to have more of these in the coming weeks and months. So stay tuned to westcoastnow.ca. The last thing I wanted to ask you, Jackie, and I know we kind of talked about this the other day when we were chatting. But when we mentioned it earlier, when people look out, over the ocean, I asked you kind of what you hope they kind of feel or think. But I think it's more potent to ask you, when you look out over the ocean after all of these years of doing the work that you do, having the relationship, the intimate relationship that you do with the ocean, what do you feel and think?
I feel humility. I feel in service. I feel connected. I know my place. Maybe that's it above all things. And I'm not crying out of sadness for the ocean at all, but I am so grateful that life led me to this, to doing one small part of the planet and having made the life choices where I was able to choose for what I considered the most valuable. And for me, this is about future generations of humpbacks, future generations of humans. And what I feel is like, yeah, that sense of place and having found where even my most annoying traits might end up being of use.
No doubt. We can only feel so lucky to have that same sentiment in our lives. That is kind of bringing us to the end of this conversation. I can't thank you enough, Jackie, for giving us your time and your insights about this. It's just been incredible. Is there anything else that you wanted to point out to our viewers about anything?
Just that push, folks. Like if you could go to the Marine Education Research Society, tomorrow's the deadline for the potential downlisting of fin whales. The basics aren't known, the threats are increasing, and this, like, I'm not being dramatic, this really is a big deal. And it's a very short government survey. Like, do you think they should be downlisted? So you might have an answer for that. And we have a whole blog if you need more background. If you can't find it, let me know. And thank you for that opportunity.
Of course, any chance to tell the government what they should be doing, and rather the vice versa is a good day. Anything else from you?
No, all I must say is what a great conversation we have had. I feel so informed, and honestly, my curiosity is only piqued. So
yeah, same. It's so great. To all the folks who are out there watching live, our thanks to you for joining us. We hope it was as informative and as exciting as it was for us. A big thank you to Em, of course, my co-host, and to Jackie Hildering, the Marine detective. But that's just one little part of who you are. So definitely go check out the other work that she does on Facebook, on her website. As mentioned at the beginning, westcoastnow.ca, we're a regional media initiative. We dive into all kinds of coastal issues, basically from Vancouver Island all the way up to the fjords of northern BC and over to Haida Gwaii. If you know of any interesting characters or any stories along the coast, news tips that you think that we should cover, please reach out to us. That's at info@westcoastnow.ca. Just drop us a line, let us know what's going on, and we'll definitely follow up and get back to you. If you like the work that we're doing on westcoastnow.ca, by all means, you can become a patron today. Contribute what you can to keep the work going. We'd love your support, and we'll have some more goodies for you as well in the coming weeks and months. So stay tuned to that. Of course, you can follow us on our website as well, on our Facebook page, and stay up to date with all the latest news that's breaking along your coast, BC's West Coast. But I'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much again, and thanks to our audience for watching. We'll see you next time.